Hello and welcome to my presentation where I explain the Great Flood myth from Greek mythology. There are many mythological and religious stories which tell of a great flood, and the Greek mythology has one of its own as well. But first, we need to establish something important. The Greek mythology was adopted by the Romans, so a lot of the Greek pantheon was assimilated into Roman mythology. Therefore, a lot of these characters are similar to the Roman gods. Zeus is similar to Jupiter, Poseidon is similar to Neptune, Hades is similar to Pluto, and so on. Just because the Romans adopted Greek mythology, though, doesn't mean these characters are one-to-one. Sure, Zeus and Jupiter have a lot in common, but they're not exactly the same person. And the reason I bring this up is because I'm going to explain both versions considering how similar they are. The Greek version came first. It's fairly short, and it's very straightforward, whereas the Roman version is more of an expansion with slight alterations. So let's just get started. In order to fully understand this, we need to briefly mention the 5 ages of man represented in Greek mythology. The first age of man is known as the Golden Age. This age was ruled not by the Olympian gods, but by the Titans, the generation before the Olympian gods. During this era, man did not need to work to obtain food. The earth simply provided food in abundance. Not only did they not need to work for food, but they also lived extremely long lives, hundreds of, maybe even possibly thousands of years long, while retaining a youthful appearance. And man was truly innocent as they did not harm one another. Therefore, their deaths would be peaceful. The Silver Age and every age after it are ruled by Zeus and the Olympians. The Silver Age is kind of like the Golden Age, but just not as swell. Man didn't live as long, but they still lived hundreds of years, and they spent most of their time under the care of their mothers, and only aged to adulthood after they left the care of their mothers. As adults is when they would struggle the most. It is said that they struggled against one another, and during this age, men refused to worship the gods, so Zeus destroyed them. Following the Silver Age is the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is far more brutal than the Golden and Silver Age. Men of this time were described as being hardened and rough. Violence was pretty much everywhere, and it was the thing driving them in life. And after they were destroyed comes the Heroes Age. Now, this age is where the bulk of the Greek mythology takes place, and it is the age where heroes like Heracles, Odysseus, and Achilles lived. And finally is the Iron Age, in which man is currently living in, and it's described as a cold and tough time where kids aren't honoring their parents, you have lawlessness running afoot, and you've got sleazeballs running institutions where they actually don't have the people's interests at heart and are only interested in their own gains. And because of this, the gods have abandoned man. They used to frequently mingle with mortals, but they decided to take a back seat and withdraw from our society altogether. Now, they still perform acts of miracle behind the scenes, but you're not going to see them face to face anymore. Now, with all that in mind, the story of the Great Flood takes place at the end of the Bronze Age. During Deucalion's reign, Zeus decided to wipe out the human population of the Bronze Age due to their violent nature. The Titan Prometheus, who created man, knew what Zeus was planning, so he relayed this information to his son, Deucalion. In order to survive the impending catastrophic event, Prometheus advised Deucalion to construct a sealed chest and stock it with essential supplies. He and his wife Pyrrha, the daughter of Prometheus's brother Epithemius, and Pandora entered the vessel before the onset of the cataclysm. After the construction of this chest, Deucalion and Pyrrha boarded it. Zeus initiated a torrential rainfall that submerged most of Greece. The flooding drove humanity to near extinction, as a few survivors managed to escape to the top of mountains. Now, did these people perish in the flood? I don't know. Perhaps, but nothing is stated that they did in fact die. Zeus continued to flood the world for 9 days and 9 nights. Deucalion and Pyrrha's chest grounded on Mount Parnassus. Once the rainfall ceased, he performed a ritual offering to Zeus. I'm not sure what kind of offering, but I would assume it's an animal sacrifice, if we assume the chest was big enough to contain one. Zeus was pleased by this offering because he then sent Hermes down to hear whatever message Deucalion has. Deucalion asks for the restoration of mankind, to which Zeus approves, and his instructions to Deucalion are to repopulate the world by having he and Pyrrha each throw stones over their heads. The stones thrown by Deucalion transform into men, while the stones thrown by Pyrrha became women. It may seem a little strange that they had to throw stones which would become people, but since the people come from stone, it is said that the Greek word for people comes from the Greek word for stone. And if you love etymology like I do, then you'll find that piece of information interesting. But to be honest, that's really all the information we have about the Greek version of this story. But let's hop right into the Roman version. By the time the story of the flood begins, Zeus has already made up his mind that he's going to flood the earth, whereas Jupiter is kind of on the fence. He knows humanity has become corrupted, but he's not yet convinced the world needs to be cleansed of humans. So he decides he's going to give them one last chance, and he's going to take the form of a human to observe them with his own eyes. Jupiter roams amongst the mortals, and he's not pleased in what he sees. Then he visits King Lycaon. It's a story for another day, but all you need to know for now is that he served Jupiter human flesh, and he was so enraged he transformed Lycaon into the first werewolf. But if it was just Lycaon who was evil and corrupted, then Jupiter would have spared man. But because he noticed that all of them are just as bad as he, Jupiter decided he was going to wipe them all out. He then led a council amongst the other gods and goddesses and told them what he witnessed. The gods were pretty much all in agreement to Jupiter's plan, but it did raise a question: who would worship them if man was wiped out? Jupiter was indeed going to wipe out man, but he would replace man with a new race, one more miraculous, unlike the first. Initially, Jupiter wasn't actually going to flood the earth like Zeus did. He intended to use thunderbolts to strike the earth and engulf it in a sea of flames. However, he reconsidered this once he realized that if he were to do that, then he could possibly end the world, as it is prophesied that the world would end by being consumed in fire. Jupiter didn't want to fulfill this prophecy, so he would overwhelm mankind with a disastrous flood. Jupiter then commands the north and south wind to create some really nasty rain clouds, which will pour down a heavy rain. Iris, the messenger god, assists Jupiter by steaming the moisture to make sure the clouds don't stop raining. But Iris wasn't the only god to help Jupiter. The god Neptune commanded the rivers and streams to do his bidding. He then took his trident and struck the earth. You got Jupiter raining down from above, and Neptune causing the sea to overflow and flood the earth from below. Together, they made an unstoppable force. Crops, homes, cities, nothing was safe, and their might eventually consumed everything. Land animals were overtaken by the waters. Birds searched for somewhere to land, but they couldn't. Therefore, once they became tired, they fell into the sea. Only a few stragglers managed to survive by finding refuge in some buoyant objects like boats and oars. But because they lacked any food, they met their end due to starvation. This is where we're finally introduced to Deucalion and Pyrrha. They're amongst some of the stragglers who managed to survive so far. Their boat drifted to Mount Parnassus, as the tip of the mountain was not yet submerged underwater. Once they docked onto land, they prepared themselves to worship the deities and the goddess Themis. It is said that there is no man more good and just than Deucalion, and no woman who feared the gods more than Pyrrha. Jupiter took a look at the flooded earth and saw that the only mortals left were Deucalion and Pyrrha, who were indeed innocent and worshipping the gods. Therefore, he put an end to his wrath. The rain subsided and the clouds parted. Neptune raised his trident from the ground and commanded the waters to recess. Hills arose as the water returned to the sea, and soil appeared once more. The earth was now restored to its former self, but as Deucalion viewed the vast and silent earth, he wept as he spoke to Pyrrha. He gives a lengthy speech, but essentially it boils down to him saying that there are only two mortals left on earth. The flood had stopped, but what's stopping the gods from doing it again? He was afraid and asks his wife what she would do if the sea were to claim him. If the sea were to claim her, then he would follow her into the sea and they would both meet their demise. Deucalion wishes he was like his father Prometheus so that he could restore mankind by creating more from clay. They wept, but the only thing they could do was ask of the aid of the sacred oracle. So they set out to the temple of the gods. Upon reaching the temple, it is not lit with fire, and it's covered in moss. Deucalion and Pyrrha threw themselves on the ground and kissed the cold stone of the floor. They then beg the goddess Themis if she is pleased by their prayers, and if the god's anger has been halted, then please give them a sign on what they can do to repopulate this barren world. Themis was moved by their earnest and humble begging, so she replied to them, "Leave the temple, veil your brows, loosen your robes, and cast behind you as you go the bones of your grandmother." The couple was dumbfounded. They stood there speechless, but Pyrrha was the first to say something. She couldn't imagine doing something so heinous as to bring disrespect to her grandmother by violating her bones. She implored Themis to forgive her. Deucalion comforted his wife, though, telling her that oracles are just and would never urge an evil deed. He suspects that what Themis is referring to is that the grandmother she speaks of is Gaia, the earth itself, as she is the mother of all, and the bones are actually stones of the earth, which must be casted behind them as they leave the temple. Pyrrha found her husband's interpretation much more comforting, but the two still were not convinced that this is what Themis truly meant. However, they found no harm in trying. So as they descended from the temple, they did exactly what they were told. They veiled their heads, loosened their robes, and threw the stones behind them. The hard and rigid stones assumed a softer form, enlarging as they took the shape of man. They looked like marble statues at first, imperfect and roughly carved. However, the soft, moist parts were then transformed into flesh, and the hard parts became bones. So it's very clear that there has been some divine intervention from the gods. Every stone casted from Deucalion became man, and every stone casted from Pyrrha became woman. That's great, with mankind now restored, but what of the flora of the earth and the rest of the animals? Well, the plants and trees do eventually return after their seeds have been nourished by the moisture in the land and by bathing in the sunlight. But the animals, on the other hand, just pop out of nowhere thanks to the gods. But with the animals also came monsters. But that's the story of the Great Flood from the Greek and Roman mythologies. If you enjoyed, then please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing.